So as the Championship summer transfer window has now closed, I thought we'd have a little bit of a closer look into some of the numbers from each Championship club. At the end of every window, always like to have a little bit of a deeper dive into each club's net spend, and today we're going to be stacking each Championship club up against each other. See who's made the biggest profits and who's made the biggest losses. If you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. 300 likes will be massively appreciated. And before we get in, it's worth noting that all these figures are from transfer marks, so some of them may be slightly off, but generally speaking we'll get a good pattern here to see how much each club has been spending. Without any further ado, let's jump in. So coming in at the bottom of the net spend table and making by far and away the biggest profit of any Championship club, it was Southampton, the only Championship club to generate over 100 million in overall profits. Now Southampton did make some pretty big signings with Shea Charles and Ross Stewart both coming in for significant transfer fees, but the players they sold more than covered the costs of those incoming players. They received massive transfer fees for the likes of Lavia, Livramento, Ward-Prowse and Teller amongst others, and overall generating a huge profit this summer. Southampton also used their free agents market fairly well, picking up the likes of Joe Lumley and Ryan Manning on free transfers, and also used the loan market to their advantage as well overall to boast a massive profit. Next up, and with an overall profit of 52.9 million, we have Leicester City. Quite similar situation to Southampton, where Leicester spent a load of money this summer, but they made more than that back through player sales. Harry Winks being their biggest deal in the end, but they also spent large sums of money on the likes of Tom Cannon, Conor Cody and Steffi Mavididi, but the biggest outgoings being the likes of Maddison, Barnes, Castagne, who all brought in massive transfer fees. In 22nd place we have Watford, boasting an overall profit of 39.7 million. Now Watford, compared to previous transfer windows, definitely had to live within their means. This summer was really about clearing the decks and refreshing that squad, and mostly Watford were relying on free transfers and loan deals to build up the rest of their squad, Rajovic being their most expensive signing in the end, but the vast majority of their incoming money coming through the sales of Joao Pedro and Ismail Assar. Next up we then have Norwich City, who are in a fairly similar situation to Watford, whereby they were mostly reliant on the free agents market to build up their squad. They did spend a bit on Christian Fashnak, but generally speaking this was a summer where Norwich were looking to refresh and rebuild their squad, their biggest outgoings being the likes of Omobamidele, Max Aarons, Milot Rashica and Ballymunba, of course, who they all cashed in on. Bristol City chose to get their business done fairly early on in the window, and obviously towards the end they then went ahead and cashed in on Alex Scott. In the end, Bristol City getting a really decent fee for Scott, and overall, considering their incomings, boasted a profit of around 15 million. Will be interesting to see if a bit more of that money is spent in January, or maybe with a look going into next season, but Bristol City making a massive profit on the back of that Scott sale. Swansea had a really productive transfer window in the end, signing 13 new players, Jerry Yates being their most expensive capture, but all the players they brought in were more than covered by the players they went ahead and sold. Joel Perreault being their biggest sale, but they also cashed in on the likes of Michael Obafemi, Morgan Whittaker and Stephen Bender this summer, overall to generate a profit just over 11 million. West Brom banking a profit of around 6.7 million, maybe a little bit more in time with add-ons to come, but obviously West Brom aside, who definitely had to live within their means this summer, one of the few Championship clubs who didn't spend any money in terms of incoming players, relying on free transfers and loan deals to bolster up their squad, and obviously their biggest sale in the end being Dara O'Shea, who moved on to Burnley this summer. Coventry were one of the biggest spending sides in the Championship this summer, but because of how much money they made from their incoming players, they actually generated an overall profit of 6.3 million. In the end, Coventry spending around about 25 million on incoming players, but because of those massive sales, the transfer fees they got for Victor Gyökeres and Gus Hamer, they do boast an overall profit. I think that Mark Robbins has done a really good job with rebuilding that squad, strengthening it across the board. Maybe still one midfielder short, as we mentioned in the last video, but even so, Cov have done a fine job with remoulding that team. Blackburn Rovers, not too much money was spent on incoming players, and they also had the departures of Thomas Kaminski and Ashley Phillips, where they got a decent chunk of change from them in the end. Not the most productive of transfer windows for Blackburn, but they were in profit. In 15th place we have Middlesbrough with a profit of 2.8 million this summer, pretty much all of that profit coming through the sale of Chuba Akpom, who did depart for Ajax in the end, obviously. Borough were in a bit of a tricky situation with Akpom, as the forward only had 1 year left on his deal, so it looked more than likely that he would depart at some point. Borough's biggest deal themselves of the window was for Emmanuel Latte-Lath. He'll be looking to replace the goals that they've lost in Akpom and Archer. In 14th place, it's QPR with a profit of 2.7 million. We had some outgoings fairly early on in the window for QPR, with Seny Dieng and Rob Dickey both departing, but past that point I think a few people were expecting a few more departures out of QPR, but that didn't really happen in the end. Obviously kept hold of Chair and Willock, and in order to build up their squad they were mostly reliant on loanees and the free agents market. With the sale of Etienne Kamara, Huddersfield do boast a small profit from this window, but overall it wasn't the most productive of transfer windows for Huddersfield Town, I think it's fair to say. They struggled to get many deals over the line this summer and could find themselves in a bit of a tricky situation because of that come the end of the season. Sunderland were a really interesting side in this window, and at the end of it they actually boast a profit of 1.6 million because of that sale of Ross Stewart. Now Sunderland had spent a fair chunk of change on bringing in some new youngsters who they'll look to develop and potentially sell on for a higher fee in the future. Joe Bellingham, definitely someone who's grabbed a lot of headlines so far in that Sunderland squad, and there was the potential for significantly more outgoings on deadline day, with Patrick Roberts and Jack Clark both attracting interest throughout the window and late on, but in the end it was just Ross Stewart and Lyndon Gooch and Denny Batt who went out towards the end. But all those sales mean that Sunderland did turn a small profit, and impressively so, Birmingham are in 11th with a profit of 650k, considering I think they're much stronger coming out of this window than they were going into it. It's really impressive how they've managed to almost entirely rebuild that squad from back to front whilst making a profit in this window as well. Obviously the sales of Tahith Chong and Joe Bellingham sort of funding this window for Blues to go out and spend quite a bit of money. They also had the sell-on clause in Jude Bellingham's deal and him going to Real Madrid, and those numbers aren't even included in these figures, so Blues will have boasted an even bigger profit if you add in those Bellingham figures as well. But overall, good stuff from Birmingham, and definitely a side who could be winning the window. After that we have Cardiff, who boast a marginal profit from this summer. No real significant outgoings. Ryan Alsop and Max Watters both left the club, but no big money sales in the end for Cardiff, who obviously were working under a transfer embargo, who had to live within their means, so loanees and free transfers were on the agenda, but generally speaking I think they added some good talent to their squad. Into the top 9 we go, and this is where we get into the Championship clubs who actually made a loss this transfer window. Rotherham come in 9th place with an overall outlay of 940k, their biggest sale being Ben Wiles, who moved on to Huddersfield, but Rotherham broke their transfer record not once but twice in this window, obviously with Christ Taihi coming in and then Sam Nombe coming in towards the end of the window as well. Looking forward to seeing how those new players gel in with the Millers. Next then we have Sheffield Wednesday. I don't believe they made any money from outgoing players this window, so Sheffield Wednesday, these numbers are exclusively on the money they sort of spent this summer. I think their biggest incoming in the end being Gassama coming in from PSG. A fair few loanees and free transfers also picked up throughout the window for Sheffield Wednesday, but they did spend on a few players. Just above Sheffield Wednesday we then have Plymouth Argyle with a minus net spend of 2.1 million. Obviously the big incomings for Plymouth this summer being Ballymumba and Morgan Whittaker, both on permanent deals. We've said it a few times, but I think Plymouth got really good deals with both of those players. I think in the end paying just over $1 million for each of them. And then other than those deals, Plymouth were mostly reliant on free transfers in the loanee market. And it's quite nice how this net spend table works out, because we actually have all three newly promoted sides all alongside each other. In 6th place we have Ipswich Town with a negative net spend of 3 million. Ipswich not really having any major sales go through this summer, but they did dip into their pockets, especially with the incomings of Jack Taylor and George Hurst. So in the end Ipswich were the biggest spending of the three sides coming up from League One, but in the end not perhaps spending as much money as a lot of people had originally tipped them to do. And it's not often that my side, Preston North End, will be this high up on a net spend table, but overall Preston ending the window with negative net spend of 3.3 million. North End didn't really have any major sales go through this summer. Obviously we lost Daniel Johnson, but that was on a free transfer. Bambo Diaby departed, but that was for a very minimal fee to Sheffield Wednesday. And in the end I think the ownership has really shown some ambition at Deep Dell this summer. We've dipped into our pockets with the European market, picking up the likes of Mastrojka Jensen and Milutin Osmajic, who came in on deadline day as well. Some other savvy pickups, the likes of Dwayne Holmes, Will Keane, who all came in for marginal fees. And all in all, I think a successful window for Preston. Coming in fourth place, we then have Leeds United with negative net spend of 3.9 million, and it's absolutely night and day comparing Leeds United's figures this summer with Leicester and Southampton, who both made massive profits through player sales. Leeds weren't quite as fortunate this summer because of how they've configured a lot of their contracts in the Premier League. Ultimately, they ended up loaning out a lot of players instead of cashing in on them, and the only real significant transfer fee they received in the end was for Tyler Adams. Obviously, some big signings made by Leeds, the likes of Joel Perreault and Ethan Ampadu being two of the biggest signings we saw in the Championship this summer, but a lot of those incomings weren't really offset by player sales as they've loaned out quite a few of them. Hull City saved quite a bit of their spending until the end of the window. The biggest deal they got over the line was obviously for Jaden Philogene, coming in for just under or around about £5 million. Obviously they spent a fair chunk of change on Aaron Connolly as well, but also used the loanee market to their advantage. And in second place we have Millwall. It's not all too often we'd see Millwall this high up on a net spend table for the Championship, but no massive sales from Millwall this summer. There was maybe the temptation to cash in on Zian Fleming amid the interest from Burnley, but he's still stuck around, and they then went ahead and paid for the likes of Matthias Sarkic, Kevin Nisbet and Casper Denor, all paying over £1 million for each of those players, which gives them an overall net spend of just above £5 million. But coming in at the top of the overall Championship net spend table, it's Stoke City with a negative 7.7 million outlay on their overall spending this summer. Now, Stoke did make a few sales, and it's also worth remembering that they sold Harry Souttar in the January transfer window last season for a significant transfer fee, I think 15 million, potentially rising to 20. So if you factor in that sale into this season's numbers, then Stoke would actually be in a profit, but discounting that as it was last season, Stoke have spent a lot of money. Their biggest deal in the end being for Walter Berger. Already like the look of him, to be fair, and they also spent significant transfer fees on some of their other incomings. There was a massive turnover of players at Stoke this summer, and I'm very interested to see how Alex Neil gets on with this new look squad. But guys, there we have it. There was every Championship club and how much they spent this summer, ranking them all by their net spend. If you did go to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do get your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Apart from that though guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.